Welcome to Curito Connects. I'm your host, Jenn, and I've been conversing with friends around the world about life challenges and impactful moments. Conversations on this platform look at answering the questions, how we overcome challenges and how our experiences shape who we are and the work we do today. I hope this work can inspire you on your own personal and individual journey. Let's dive right in. Hello, my guest today is Marta Magdalena, co-founder with her husband, John Tattva of Ashtanga Nilayam, Singapore. I had to tongue twist here with all these words. But hi, Marta.
Hello. Hi, Jennifer. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you for coordinating with me. I think it took us almost a year for us to be able to record this together today. And you're sitting in Spain
my
right
bad,
now.
Sorry.
No, it happens. But you're currently sitting in Spain right now, right? For training, is that right?
Yes, I'm in Barcelona. We went in Tenerife for a couple of weeks just to become students and refresh our minds and bodies. And now we are in beautiful Barcelona, just chilling, being tourists and enjoying beautiful European cities.
Since COVID. So I'm so thrilled to have Marta with us. Marta and I met at Michelle Papa and Dr. Jean's Mindful Birth Australia course back in 2018 in Hong Kong, when teacher trainings were still a thing and you could travel around the world to take different courses. But slowly we're returning to normalcy now. But at the time, I think in our class, there was about only 4 students who flew in from abroad to Hong Kong to attend this program. And Marta, I think you were flying in from Singapore at the time, and I was flying in from Taiwan.
Yes.
So I think we connected because there was only a handful of us who were not students living in Hong Kong. So those of us who were living in hotels and trying to figure out where to eat during the lunch breaks and stuff kind of hung out more often than the others. I think what's interesting to me is your journey, Marta, right? So you're born in Poland, and then you're a former architect living in Berlin at the time, also running your own Astanga Yoga shala. This was around 2010 to 2017 before you decided to say bye to that career path in life and come out to Singapore in 2018.
Wait.
I
didn't really decide, it was the life circumstances that got me there.
Life circumstances, and we'll come back to that. Where you now run your Ashtanga studio with your husband and daughter, Isabel. So I'm really excited to chat with Marta today about yoga and motherhood, and the ups and downs and what she has learned along the way. So I'm going to stop there and kind of let you take it from here, because I kind of summarized it very quickly, and obviously there's a lot of little bits and pieces you can fill in from there.
Yeah, I don't know where to start with, but so just before I met you on the teacher training, I moved to Singapore. I think it was early 2018, around February, that I just packed all my belongings, sold my car, sold all my furniture, and got a one-way ticket to Singapore. So that was really a beautiful change in my life that took me where I am now. But yeah, there have been many steps before, and many decisions and many years of practice and trips and learnings that got me to that point. So where should I start? Should I start with the beginning of my yoga journey, or should I start why did I go to Singapore in the first place?
I think where we can start is your yoga journey, right? And where you started your yoga journey, and then your career path at the time.
I think when you ask me to actually, I also think I actually need to start by excusing myself that it took us so long to get into this podcast. But what I realized, one thing is, of course, being a mother, I've been very busy. But second is that I was simply procrastinating, because speaking about myself is definitely not my pair of shoes. So I thought Podcasts are amazing, but it's way beyond my comfort zone, which is eventually nice that I find myself here, um, and that it's something to share. Well, so I was basically over the past few days trying to find like 5 minutes here and there to think what to say and how did all this start, and how from being very passionate architecture student and a fresh architect, I completely decided to change it and to drop it and to go a completely different way. And I came to the point where I realized it all started almost 20 years ago. I mean, I'm not that old, but I was quite young at the time. And I was just, this teenager who was looking for some deeper meaning in life. And I came across a pile of books written by the Bhagavan Rajneesh. I don't know if you know him, probably under the name of Osho. So Osho was a very cool spiritual guru, quite controversial for those of you who have seen the Netflix series about him that reveals some truths. But back then I had no clue. I just went to this bookstore looking for some book, and there was this pile of these worn out books. I think they were giving them out for free, so I just took a pile of the Osho books and I started reading. And being 16 or maybe 18 years old at the time, I was completely thrilled. I was like, wow, that's something else. I've been reading a lot of books because I think I was quite of I don't want to say introvert, but rather like a person, living my own peaceful life, having, I like to say, a rich inner world, a lot of
Yeah.
inner conversations going on. I wouldn't really party or socialize that much when I was young. I was just doing my own things. So I loved books. And then when I came across this book by Osho, I was just like, wow, that's something I was looking for. Like I didn't even know I was looking for, but when you start reading about the mindfulness and self-love and kindness and following your life passion, when you are in this age of like 16 and you want to rebel and you hate everyone and you hate yourself, and like we all go through that, right? So finding these kind of books at that point was just like a bliss. It was really amazing. And that's when it all started. Back then in Poland, yoga was not something that you would hear about. So when I first told my mom that I want to attend the yoga class, she was really scared. Okay, she was like, "But what is that? Like, like let's go for some fitness together, or like let's go for a walk. It will be better. This yoga, I don't know. We are Christians. Maybe it's a little against." She was quite scared. But I was lucky enough. The yoga classes in my city, the only ones that I knew about, were actually held in a gym, in a fitness studio. So that was kind of like still accessible socially, because you go for this weird yoga stuff, which back then was quite esoteric, spiritual, God knows what about. But
Yeah.
they were held at the fitness studio, so I was I was fine. So I started going there, and I really well remember my first class, and I think that was a Iyengar class. And when I sat on this, in Iyengar you have all this blanket and bolsters and blocks, and it takes you like 15 minutes to prepare everything, and before you're finally allowed to sit on it in some dandasana or a simple twist. But after the class, I was bliss. I was like, oh my God, it's like first time in my life I feel connected with my body. Like I even know that there is something like me in my body. The ability to understand the breath and the focus on the breath. I felt like, oh my God, I'm home. And that was beautiful. And I think ever since I still keep it in mind, and keep recalling this first class and the first teacher. And it keeps me really grounded, and it really makes me follow the path for like almost 20 years now, which is a lot. So that's how it all started, and then from there, step by step, I started taking it more often, more regularly, like from once a week, maybe twice a week, maybe thrice a week. Then at some point, I remember one of my teachers. She was like, "Marta, you should try Ashtanga Yoga." And I was like, what is that? I've been just doing, this Iyengar inspired hatha classes. So I went for this Ashtanga class, which literally killed me because It was, of course, the LED full primary series, which is definitely not a thing where a beginner should go. Or, I wasn't that beginner. I've been practicing some gentle hatha for a couple of years, but back then it was more like a mind stuff. My body was not ready for the challenges of full primary, and that's not the way you should learn Ashtanga. So, but anyways, I had no choice. There was no Mysore program in Poland or in my city back then. So I think after the first 20 minutes, I wanted to die. After half an hour, I wanted to run away, and then I was like cursing, and I'm never going to be back there. But for some reason, I kept going back. Until at some point I traveled to India, and then I realized that this is the thing I want to do, that I want to go deeper into it because there is more to it than the postures. And that's how my journey began. And it was more than 10, 12 years ago. So ever since I've been just practicing Ashtanga. And I think that's the super powerful method which really changes your life and changes your mind and opens you on, unknown, and helps you make all these weird decisions like quitting the job, traveling to India, changing countries, and just following your own path, which is eventually what we all want to do
Yeah.
in the pursuit of happiness, right?
So, I'm just curious. So, what did your mom think when you decided to say, "I'm gonna go to India for yoga"? Because you had mentioned earlier you.
Yeah, I think, but at that time, my parents, they already knew I am the way I am, and if I decide something, I will do it, no matter the price. So my first India trip, I think, was around 2009, maybe, or 2010. So I've been doing yoga for quite a while. So I had an excuse like, I've been doing it. I want to understand how it is. But there was always this curiosity in me towards India. Like even long before I started practicing yoga, maybe that's the reason I took these Osho books because, there was this Indian guru on the cover. there was, I remember as a child, I had this beautiful book with world maps, and there were different countries, and each country had different colors and people in the traditional clothes. And I would always scroll through and open on the page of India, and there was this lady in this green pink sari with this huge nose ring, golden one, and a lot of golden jewelry. I was maybe 8 or I don't know 10 when I had this book, or even smaller, but it's been always in the back of my head. So I think then this yoga and all the books that I was reading about it, it was one way. Like I had no choice. I just had to go there.
You were
And
just
so my
very drawn to it, right? It was just a calling for you.
Totally, it was like a calling. And my first trip was just a simple backpacking. Um, I just took my backpack and I left for a couple of months. And that was in the north of India. I think a year or 2 years before, I took a year off and already traveled to Asia. I spent a couple of months in Indonesia and Sumatra as a part of some artistic internship. But it wasn't very successful, so I came back earlier and then just hang around for some time in Europe. And then after I resumed studies, I thought like, okay, let's go to India now because the Indonesia was like kind of almost my place, but not really. So I was already a little bit used to solo traveling with backpack in Asia, so the India trip wasn't that hardcore. But I went to many really beautiful places. So I think I flew to Delhi, and from there traveled up north to Rishikesh, to Dehradun. There I took a couple of weeks intensive Iyengar yoga training. And actually attending this Iyengar yoga training made me realize that Ashtanga is what I want to do.
What?
Because I think
Yeah. What was
back
it?
in the yeah, I was back in the time, like somewhere like transiting. So one leg was still following the Iyengar path, and the other was in this led Ashtanga classes, which I initially hated, but for some reason I just kept doing it. Why? Iyengar yoga is very different from Ashtanga, and as much as it's physical, I don't know how to say it, but original Indian teachers who teach yoga are very different than the Western teachers that we know in Singapore or in Asia. They are very strict. If you listen to stories about PKS Iyengar, he was a really strict guy. He would yell, he would punch, he would slap, he would curse. He was, I mean, he was still apparently much kinder than Krishnamacharya, the father of modern yoga, who would really abuse his students in the name of love and sharing the authentic path. But Iyengar was quite similar. So the person I practiced with, his name was Rajiv, and I think he's still running this retreat. He was an amazing teacher, but he was a very dedicated student of Iyengar, and and he was almost as strict as him. So sometimes he would put us into downward dog and just talk and yell on us for like 45 minutes, and you're all the time in this downward dog. And that's how it was. That's how it was also in Pune. I also had a chance to go to the Pune Institute, where Iyengar used to teach when he was alive. And yeah, and then you would just see people in these weird postures just being there for hours and hours. When we think about the benefits of asana, I personally believe that they probably do the job, but you really need to stay longer, right? Like we say that, like some of the postures, I don't know, they regulate your blood pressure, or they work on the eyesight, or they work on the nervous system. So either you would need to do a lot of asana that have the benefit, or just stay in one asana for a long time. So that's what they do, and that's the authentic Iyengar yoga. And for me, I just realized it's just too much talking. I need my inner silence. And the beauty of
Mm.
Ashtanga is that when you start practicing a Mysore style, the self practice, there's this inner peace and this inner silence and calmness. And it's like a moving meditation. So that's what
Mm.
makes you feel like I have arrived. This is this
Ah.
inner beauty.
I like that comparison that you did there with Iyengar and Ashtanga, and like for you personally, how you also transitioned between the two, right? Appreciating both practices, but what really worked for you versus the other practice.
Yeah, I think one can learn so much from both of them, but it's just a personal path that we choose, right?
Yeah. I do want to ask too, though, just kind of going back to an earlier topic we talked about, was you didn't go straight into teaching as your full time, right? Like you knew you wanted to be on this yoga path, you were studying, you were practicing, but at the same time, you, like many of us, when we first, study and graduate from college, etc., you did take a career path of being an architect, right? And you moved to another big city at the time. So, can you share with us a little bit about that period, and how you kind of like decided to go into an architect firm, move out to Berlin, but also run a shala? And then at what point did you say, like you said earlier, you're like, I don't want to do architecture anymore. This is the path I want to take.
I think it was very organic, slow, gradual growth and transition. So when we practice Ashtanga, we don't really have anything like teacher training. Um, in order to become a teacher of Ashtanga, you need to practice for a couple of years at least, have a daily established practice for, I would say, 3 to 5 years minimum. I think I had a little more. And then you maybe start assisting your teacher in the shala, start helping, wiping the mats, watching what your teacher does. And then maybe they ask you, oh, you can push in this downward dog, so that's your first assist you ever do. And maybe you do it for a couple of weeks until they say, okay, maybe you can help another student and Parangushtasana. And so that's how you learn. It's very slow and it's really based on the understanding of your own body. So when I moved to Berlin, that's where I started practicing daily Mysore classes, like really dedicated. I think I started this daily journey after 2014, uh, after my one of my trips to Mysore. But well, living in Poland and being born in Poland, you don't have really much choice. Then just after you graduate your studies, you have to start working, right? So that's the brutality of life. And I decided to move to Berlin for various reasons. One of the reasons is that um, in my profession there were just better work opportunities, but also because there were a proper Ashtanga shalas. So that were the two reasons that I wanted, to move away from Poland. Um, and and I was just gradually teaching, practicing and practicing and practicing more until at some point I thought like I would like to start sharing. But of course, having this daily job in the office from 9 to 6 p.m. I think with 1 hour lunch break, you don't have so much time, uh, to work on. But I still started with like 3 times a week evening Mysore. I think that was the first thing I started to teach, and I didn't really graduate any teacher training before. I've been just practicing by then, yoga asana for about 10 years or more, and Ashtanga for about 5 years. So that was very, very slow and very natural. I still remember the first class when I had this group of people, of my friends who lived in Berlin, and I had to chant because we always start the class by chanting the opening mantra. And it was first time in my life I was chanting in public. So I just, stepped in front of them and started chanting it. The fact that the mantra is in Sanskrit really saved me because nobody understood if I chant correctly or not. So that was a really stressful moment. Um, and then from there, I started in 2014 traveling to India yearly to Mysore, to the source of Astanga Yoga, where our teacher, Sharath Jois, continues the lineage, right? So what he inherited from his grandfather, Pataki Jois, the whole lineage of Ashtanga Yoga, he continues it and he teaches. So all of us who are, I would say, take Ashtanga more seriously than just like the weekend practice, and those of us who teach, we travel there.
Yeah.
It usually takes 5 or 6 years, 5 or 6 yearly trips to Mysore until Sharath comes to you and he's like, okay, I can authorize you, now you can teach. So I got officially authorized in 2000, I think 16 or 17, after a couple of trips to Mysore. I was already teaching before, which was not so 100% legal, but that's what most of us anyways do. And then after I got authorized, I was like, okay, now I really have to take it seriously because authorization have no value if you don't do anything with it.
Right.
Like if you keep it in your cupboard, it doesn't really work. So I thought it's a big responsibility, but now I have to shift into morning, more, running a morning Mysore, and that was quite colliding with my job. So I was just started thinking like how to do, to start working later or maybe part time. And the trouble started. I mean, trouble started actually already before because working as an architect, if you want to travel for 2 or 3 months to India, you have to quit your job, right? So every year I would quit my job, go to India, come back after 2 or 3 months, fully broke, look for another job, work for another 8 9 months, go to India. And that kept going on and on for I think 5 or 6 years. So over the 7 years of living in Berlin, I think I quit my job like, I don't know, 6 or 7 times. And I was making jokes that soon they would be like, they would blacklist me, like, please don't hire her. She will quit work after a couple
Oh.
of months to go to India. Because I think my mind was not there. And as much as I really loved architecture as a student, and when I started working, it's really hard work. You really need to work fully, and you really need to give your heart and yourself into architecture to be a successful architect. And my mind was completely not there. Like I felt that I'm not honest with myself,
Yeah.
sitting in the office, because I just wanted to go out and go to teach, or I would come tired because you have to get up at 4 in the morning to do your practice, to make it to work by 8:30 or 9. And then after that, after this 8 or 9 hours in the office, I still go and teach and then go to sleep, and then it's another day. And I was just exhausted. And it kept going like that for a couple of years. And then I was like literally looking forward to when I can quit the job and go to India again, because I was so tired.
Do you
And
remember? Do you remember that
Yeah.
day? Do you remember that day you made that decision where you're like, I really can't keep doing this anymore. Like, this is not sustainable. I have to pick.
I mean,
Like,
I
I
kept
have to,
making.
and not looking like, and then making that decision and going, okay, this is it. I'm not gonna do this whole, like, 8 months work just to fund my India trip. I'm going to just go all in.
Yeah, before every trip to India and after every trip to India, I was saying that to myself, And then I think it was 2017 when I decided, like, okay, now it's really the time. And I wanted to open my own shala in Berlin. So I've been renting a small studio, and the studio was quite small. Maybe I think 6 or 8 mats would fit in. And I felt like I really need a proper space. I have some savings now. I can create this down architecture for good, and I can just focus on yoga. Um, and then I traveled to Mysore, and then I met John, and then
Oh,
and then everything changed again because, well, after I met John, I think knowing him for like 3 or 4 days, I knew that that's the person I want to be with, but John is originally from India. He was born in Bangalore, but he worked in Delhi for a couple of years, and then I think 2 years prior to meeting me, he moved to Singapore because of work. He already then worked as a full-time teacher. So when we met, he was in Singapore, and there was this maybe few brief moments of doubt, like should he come to Berlin and should we open the shala together as I was planning, or should I go to Singapore? And I think, well, because of the weather and because of the sun and because of the fact that living in Europe, you are depressed for half of the year, and it's just too cold and too dark, and you want to run away anyways. It wasn't that hard to decide, like, okay, you know what, I'm moving to Singapore. Um,
ah.
so we
I
spent one
I like.
year as a yeah.
No, I was gonna say I like that story part because I feel like the when just throwing out there, like when we talk about relationships, and meeting your significant other, and I like that the storyline of where you're like, I just went out for another training and then I met John, and I knew like this is the person I want to be with right then and there, and then like trying to figure out like how is it going to work, right? And like you said earlier, the circumstances and making those choices, like, is he going to move, should I move, and how are we and how are we going to set this up, right?
Yeah, and it was really tough initially because we spent together less than 2 weeks in Mysore. Then he left back to Singapore. A couple of weeks later, I left back to Berlin, and I already had the job set up. I needed money, so I had to work. I couldn't really travel for the first couple of months. He also couldn't travel, so we saw each other after like 6 or 8 months. After those 2 weeks together. So he came for for 2 weeks to Berlin, and then later I visited him in Singapore for another week or two. And after that, I was like, okay, I'm coming. So, so it took me like 2 months just to quit work and make all the paperwork and prepare everything, pack myself into 2 or 3 huge suitcases, and just move on. And that was beautiful. That was brave, and I think that was this. If not the fact that I was blinded by love, I would have probably not done that. Because it was, if I think about it now, it was a really brave decision. Okay, I mean, practicing yoga, we learn, how to follow your heart, how to listen to yourself, how to understand your needs. But that was really brave. That if
Yeah.
not this years of daily practice and not the fact of being like completely into it, I wouldn't have moved the countries because I had nothing, to start with. Like I just had these 3 suitcases of mine and the room that John was staying at. So I just moved in, and then I was like, okay, so my tourist visa is 3 months. I need to figure out what's after.
That's when I met you, because then you came to
Yes, and
Hong Kong. and I
yes,
and
yes,
I
exactly.
I remember this because I remember you kind of I think you were you if I remember correctly, and you can correct me wrong here, but I do feel like when you were in that training, you were very uncertain about, like, there was a feeling of ungroundedness in terms of, like, because you packed up yourself and then parked yourself at John's apartment in Singapore and had this visa issue, right? And so you were then like, okay, I'll sign up for another course. Now I'll come to Hong Kong, sort out visa stuff. And then you were going to go back to Singapore to figure out what was next, right? Or like start a shala or start teaching there. Which is then where I met you, like maybe 8 months later in Singapore, where you're like, I might get deported. And then now we fast
So
forward. There was COVID. You got married and then had a baby. So a lot has happened.
yeah, yes, that's been quite intense time. So actually, I planned going for this teacher training in Hong Kong just before I moved to Singapore, because I felt like, okay, so I've been teaching for a couple of years. Now I want to go to a new city where nobody knows me and I want to start teaching, but I have no formal education as a teacher. I've never done any teacher training. Yes, I've done like dozens of, workshops and like tons of self practice, and done those trips to Mysore. But for people who are not in Ashtanga world, we don't get any certificate for traveling to Mysore. Like I spent altogether more than a year practicing under, uh, Sharath Jois, but you don't get any paper for that. So people who don't know who Sharath is, people who don't practice the Ashtanga lineage or don't follow it, for them it's nothing. So I felt like I need at least one paper that I've done something. And because I was for some reasons interested in the how the pregnancy works on your body and how we as women can find our path through the practice, I thought like, okay, let's do that. So that's how I ended up in Hong Kong attending this 100-hour pre and post natal training, which was amazing. It was really mind opening and a
Yeah.
really beautiful experience. And
I
I
def-
met few friends that we are still in touch until now. So.
Yeah, I think I definitely would also encourage those who are listening to this episode to definitely look into that course as well. It's a wonderfully curated course by Michelle and Dr. Jean, for those who are yoga practitioners or are teaching pregnant women or are pregnant and want to practice yoga. So having said that, I think you had a lot of learning during your pregnancy. And again, for those who are listening, I highly encourage you to follow Marta's Instagram, because she has a lot of insightful things she shares, and she posts wonderful stories as well. So, so
Thank you.
I would love to have you share that pregnancy journey, right? And then how you continue to practice. Because I think at the time too, and I vaguely recall your post on this about the do's and don'ts, right, as a pregnant woman, and especially like practicing Ashtanga, and but you kind of carried through your pregnancy and practice pretty much your whole like the whole trimester periods,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And yeah, and then your whole birthing process, and now that Isabel's born, and you still practice early in the morning. You haven't broken your routine, and have been able to accommodate that while having her as well.
Well, I mean, at least
Correct.
in theory, yeah. And practice is a little different, but yeah. Pregnancy. So, I've been thinking already for a couple of years, and especially after attending this mindful birth, that it would be beautiful to be pregnant and to experience how the body changes and how to accommodate this growing belly, this changing body, into the practice that people consider as a quite demanding, right? Because Ashtanga can get quite intense, especially if you observe it from outside and if you've never tried by yourself. But what happened when I got pregnant, I was feeling very unwell. So for me, the whole 9 months of pregnancy was a huge suffering. Uh, I was completely drained of energy, and I was feeling sick, like literally all the time. It was like a constant non-stop motion disease, and I really hated it. So all my vision of this beautifully modified practice as a growing belly, and all these beautiful photos and videos that I'm going to record being pregnant, it all didn't work out because I was just feeling so horrible through the pregnancy. But I still managed to practice. So, I mean, there were days when I would just do a few cat and cow and I was done for the day, and maybe then a long shavasana. There were days where I would do some salutations, but there were days, even towards the last few weeks of the pregnancy, where I could still do modified primary or half primary and half intermediate series. So it was really depending on how I feel, and I think the best teacher when you're pregnant is your own body and your own intuition. Because yes, there are many do's and don'ts, but what doesn't work for one person may be healing for another. So there were many of these friends or social media friends who would be writing me like, "Oh, please don't do back bends with 35 weeks baby in your belly, or don't do this, don't do that." But I was just doing what felt good, and my body was really grateful for that. And I think the most important thing when we are pregnant is to definitely keep moving. Like, no matter what you do, you should just make sure that you keep moving every day, that you just don't end up, sitting on the sofa and eating burgers just because you're allowed to, because you're growing another body in your belly. um, the movement and the strength are definitely friends of yours when you're pregnant. And I couldn't be more grateful for that and for all the strength practice that I was doing on top of my, daily practice, if you can call this cat and cow practice as well. I was still trying to go to the gym twice a week and work with a personal trainer to work on the strength. And I think that was really, really helpful when it comes to birthing and the postpartum recovery. So that's what allowed me for this very beautiful, fearful, and empowering natural birth. To push baby out of yourself, it's a really hard job. It can get quite painful and quite uncomfortable. But if you're a yogi, or if you're a person who knows their body and practices physically, and if you practice intensively, whatever it is, you're used to pain, you're used to discomfort. But the awareness that nothing lasts forever, and I think that's another beautiful teaching of yoga, right? That any discomfort that we go through, it's there, but it will not be forever. So even this birthing pain is there, but once you go deeper into it, once the baby goes out, it will be gone. So don't worry, nothing will happen. Just keep breathing, keep listening to your midwife, keep visualizing the opening lotus flower, and everything will happen. Of course, as long as the pregnancy is healthy and there are no, you know, there are no restrictions, because not everyone is lucky enough to have a healthy pregnancy. But yeah, I think we tend to underestimate female body. And I think nowadays, especially what I realized in Asia, is that many women are being told, like, "Oh no, you are not going to be able to birth vaginally. You are not. Your body is something. Your pelvis is too small, or your baby is in the wrong position." And they're really discouraged to connect with their bodies. But trusting your own body and trusting the instinct, and if you feel that everything is fine and that the pregnancy is safe, and if you are able to visualize your birth safely, I think that's a wonderful journey. Even if you feel like crap and you really hate being pregnant, as I did, the ending can be still beautiful. So for me, yeah, the 9 months were torturous, but the birth was really beautiful, and I need to give huge credits to my husband, who did an amazing job. I think he was more exhausted after birth than me. It's a hard physical work to support a birthing woman, especially because we were planning for a home birth, but in Singapore it's not really recognized. So you can't, just call a midwife and birth at home. You need to go to hospital, with some exceptions. But anyways, because of COVID, we were also not allowed to have a doula in the hospital, and I knew that I wanted to birth naturally without without any painkillers, without just purely by myself. So John had to do the job of the midwife, of doula, and chase all the hospital midwives away who were just coming and trying to give me a epidural when I was screaming, and I was like, "No, just go, let me birth." Yeah, so that was quite a funny story, but yeah, it was really empowering, and it really made me realize how strong we are, women. When I look at our mothers and our grandmothers and everyone around who had children before us, and before I was a mother, I was like, oh yeah, giving birth, having a child. Now I understand how crazy difficult job it is to bring this one to the world, and then to just go through life with it. It's really challenging. I think women are so powerful, and yeah, it's highly undervalued nowadays.
It really is. It's just so interesting to hear you talk about your birthing process and your pregnancy process because it reminds me of our class and everything we learned in class. So I'm like wondering if you applied a lot of the thought things we learned, right, and the books we read into.
I think there was one thing that I've never actually thanked Michelle for,
You can say it right
but
here.
one
We'll
thing,
have her listen to this episode.
exactly, one thing that saved my life, I think Michelle called it a speed up position. I don't
All
know if you
right.
remember, but she was guiding us through this sort of vinyasa classes, and there was one of the positions like sort of a tabletop, but then you take one foot forward next to your hand, and then you're swinging the hips back and forth, and it's quite random. I mean, it's like a hip flexor stretching. And but when I was birthing, the hospital that I was giving birth to, I wanted to birth in a natural position, not on my back, because when they put you on the back, it's really hard to push the baby out without painkillers and without support. But the hospital was not ready for that, so they really wanted me to sit on this bed, and I was like, no way, because my contractions were so strong. I just couldn't imagine lying on the back. It just gets more painful. So I was on my all fours on the floor. Okay, nurses were really, really angry about it. Like, how this woman is birthing on the floor here? What's happening here? And it was probably like half an hour that my contractions were super strong, and I felt like, okay, I really need to get her out because it's getting too crazy. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, I had this speed up position from Michelle. So being on my all fours, like 10 centimeters dilated and deeply into birthing process, I just put one of my feet forward and started swinging these hips back and forth. And it was such a relief, It's, I think the position of the pelvis is really important. I mean, definitely is. And by bringing one foot forward in the tabletop position, you just allow your pelvis to slightly open, and it aligns the way that the baby has more space to move and
Yeah.
position itself and to get ready for going out. So I spent in this speed up position probably for like 5 or 10 minutes, and then doctor finally came and allowed me to sit on the birthing stool and push the child out, because until then I was like, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't want them to cut me. I don't want them, to help the baby come out. So yeah, I think the training was really helpful. But also one thing that I realized recently is that after I attended this mindful birth training, there was someone in Singapore who told me like, "Oh, I've heard that everyone who attends this training has a baby quite soon after." And I was like, that's interesting. And somehow maybe it opened my mind, and I was like, oh yeah, maybe actually after having done this, teacher training, I'm kind of ready to get pregnant and go through the journey myself, because it's probably in a way easier to make this decision if you know how things go and if you know what to expect.
Well, that's true because you and Justine from our cohort, she also had a
Yeah,
baby around the same time as you did.
yeah, totally, exactly.
Well, I'm kind of far from that at the moment, but we'll see.
Take your time. I think there is this. I mean, it all depends on the culture and country, but even I was thinking like, oh my God, I'm getting old. I should have this baby because if not now, then when? And then when I got pregnant really fast. I didn't expect it to happen so fast. I was like, my God, I should have waited at least a year or two more, So, and I'm 36 now. So, yeah, I got pregnant when I was 35, and I really feel there is no need to rush. I think you really need to live our life, unless we have baby really young and we feel like, okay, there's nothing better in my life waiting for me. I want to have kids. That's all. It's also fine. But if you want to learn and explore world, it's so much easier about child, as lovely as they are. Even to, I mean, it took me a few months to find this 1 hour to have podcast
That's
with
right.
you because there's just two of us, myself and my husband, and there is never time for anything because you want to do your practice every day, whatever it is. Sometimes baby sleeps, but sometimes she doesn't sleep when I practice, so he needs to take care of her. You need to eat something, you need to arrange your house, you need to go to work, and then the day is over. uh,
That is very true. So you're right. We have 1 hour, and I know you have to head out soon. But before we wrap up, I want to ask you, with everything we've covered just now, which was a lot, I know. Um, what advice would you give to those who are listening to this episode? Women who are Ashtangi practitioners, who are mothers, who are yoga practitioners, or just anything that we covered, or just in general, what would you share, like your 2 words of wisdom for others? So that's my first question. And I usually always ask my guests to share some of their favorite books. And I know you're a heavy reader. You read a lot. You read some really amazing titles. I'm always asking you, like, what book is that? Did you enjoy it? If you could recommend a few with us. And lastly, because I know you guys have perhaps a retreat coming up towards the end of the year, if you could share with the audience about what you guys teach in your Singapore Shala and what other offerings you have.
sure. Um, my advice, I often keep thinking like, what would I tell to myself if I was in my mid 20s again, or if there is anything I regret in my life? And I always come to the point where I realize that I only regret things I haven't done. you know, and we are often very restricted by the society or by our mindset to really unwind and open our wings and follow the heart and follow the passion and do all this weird and crazy stuff that nobody believes will happen. So my advice is to follow the heart, just to learn how to switch off the rational thinking and just follow the heart in whatever you do, whatever your heart asks you to do, and makes you do. I think that's usually the right choice.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Hard to apply, but
um,
that's true.
it's hard, but I think this is where yoga comes in hand, because that's what we learn when we do yoga. The asana, the physical practice, is just the top of the iceberg. It's beautiful. Asana is wonderful. My life wouldn't be the same without daily asana practice, but it's not everything. And only when we start practicing other things like pranayama, meditation, trying to apply yamas and niyamas into our daily life and understand, the whole 8 limbs of yoga, as Patanjali says it, the Ashtanga Yoga, the 8 limb path, uh, then our life can change. That's why I also always tell our students, like, come and practice every day. Don't treat your yoga as a twice a week event, because it's fun, right? Twice a week, it's fun. Maybe body feels good, but if you really want to see a change in your life and in yourself, you have to practice every day, because then the yoga works as a mirror to yourself. So you can see the patterns, you can see your mindsets, you can see all the habitual things that you do and you're not aware of. And only once we start seeing it, then the change can slowly happen. Only after that, we are able to become a little better versions of ourselves. And I think when it comes to books, the one book that I would take with me on the on the desert island would be the Patanjali. Because we often say, most of people who attend the teacher trainings or practice yoga came across Patanjali, read few sutras, but if you really try to study it deeply and try to apply what he says, it takes years to understand this book. It's not an easy book. It's not like you're just going to read through it, and forget. It's something that you really need to work on to try to understand. The traditional way that we actually learn it in India is through chanting. So when I travel to Mysore, except for the asana practice, I also go for the philosophy and chanting, the Vedic chanting classes. And the chanting Sanskrit mantras and Patanjali Yoga Sutra is a really beautiful and powerful way to understand this deeper message of it. The best translation that I came across of the sutra yet is the one by Edwin Bryant. It's a very fat, I think 500 or 600 or 800 pages book.
Wow,
Okay. Cover. But again, you don't need to read it all. So start from the first chapter and read first maybe 16 sutras. Try to read them, try to understand. The first 16 describe what yoga is about in the first chapter, then another 10, 15 speak about samadhi. This is a little higher level of knowledge. And then again, the beginning of the second chapter is quite interesting. It speaks about the obstacles of the practice and how we can prevent them. So all these vrittis, all the kleshas that we speak about, and how to act in your daily life so that the yoga works, and that the yoga happens. So I think that's something that you can take with you.
Yeah, I will put all of that in the episode resources so people can follow you. They can read the book, and yeah.
Yeah, and regarding our offerings with John, we run our daily Mysore classes in our shala, the Nilayam. Nilayam is a house, so we welcome everyone to our house, our shala. And this is the best way to start the journey. We want to plan, we haven't planned yet the retreat, so we will announce once we know more. But the retreat is usually for students from all levels, where we have the morning self practice, which doesn't mean you just come in and do your self practice. We teach you the self practice. We teach you how to understand your body and how to build up the sequence. So that's what we also do in the Mysore class. And then things that we love to do is the chanting, is talking about the sutra, is pranayama, is meditation. Because I think Ashtanga, asana being so physical, we don't really need to do additional physical stuff. It's beautiful to get deeper into it and to find these other limbs of the practice.
That's great. Now I'm curious too. I'm gonna keep an eye out for when you guys put it out there. Yeah. So as I said earlier, I'll put everything in the episode resources so people can link back to you guys. Was there anything else you wanted to add before we say farewell?
Well, thank you so much for taking me out of my comfort zone and making me talk for so long.
Oh, well, thank you for sharing. And it's an honor for me to be able to hold space for you to share all that. Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. That's all we have time for today. Thank you for listening to Curito Connects. For more Connects content, collaborations, and discoveries set to inspire you on your own individual journey, please head to our website at www.curito.co. Until next time, stay inspired, and thank you for joining us at Curito Connects.